Hi everyone, welcome. We're just gonna wait a couple of seconds for everyone to come inside the room and then we will get started. But in the meantime, please feel free to use the chat box. Let us know where you're calling in from. Okay, so to get us started, I'm going to do an acknowledgement of country statement, and then we'll get into it. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which this event is taking place and pay our respects to the Indigenous elders of the past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also recognize those whose ongoing efforts to protect and promote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures will leave a lasting legacy for future elders and leaders. Okay, so welcome everyone. So this is the latest WORK180 community event. So if you're not familiar with WORK180, we are a jobs board with a difference. We pre-screen employers on paid parental leave, pay equity, flexible working, which you're going to hear about, and much more. So this information is not usually publicly listed anywhere, and it is a central tool in your job search when you're assessing employers. So the space that you're in right now is our free online community space where we offer free career coaching sessions. So this is a safe space. You're welcome to ask questions, offer your own advice, and network with like-minded women. And today we are going to hear from Quantum Impact. So we have Kate, Fiona, and Joe on the team, or on the call from the team. And yeah, they're going to get us started, introduce themselves, and introduce the topic. But please use the chat box. We'll probably do questions at the end, but definitely keep chatting in there and we can jump in there if anything comes up. But otherwise, I will put myself on mute and hand it over.
Thanks, Jenna. Really lovely to be here and lovely to see all these people from all around, mainly Australia that I can see so far, but maybe some more joining. When we were talking about what would be a topic, quite a few from Perth, which is my original hometown, so lovely to see you here. When we were first talking about this topic, we were thinking about what would be valuable for people, and we know that as we're coming out, into a more accepted hybrid way of working, there's lots of conversations and lots of discussions about working out what's the right way to work effectively, and what's creating the work environment that will work for you.
Yeah, I think an interesting conversation, interesting time of year to be having this discussion with lots of pressure on organisations, in some cases, not just in terms of delivery, but economically as well. So I think there's lots of interesting dynamics. The new year will be a new opportunity to refresh and reset, expectations. And that will go twofold from organisations and equally from individuals as well. So I think the opportunity today is to really start to think about what does flex look like for you? What's your optimum formula, or what is it that you want? And then how you really dig into those conversations as well. As we said, obviously you've got myself and Fee with you today. Jo from our team, you can see her as well, is online to support any questions that you've got and also share any extra resources that we've got that may be able to help you have this conversation as well. Just if we are meeting for the first time, which I think would be many of you, I suspect, but Fee and I are the authors of a book called Core Confidence. I think you can see that. We wrote that back in 2018. It really was the culmination, I guess, of our own personal journeys and also the journeys of clients that we had worked with in a private women in leadership program. And why confidence? Because all roads tended to lead back to confidence. We talk about career planning. I've got my career background, or my professional background, is accounting, but then I stepped into the world of consulting and ultimately now this world of leadership development, particularly for female leaders. But we'll be having conversations around career. All roads would lead back to confidence. We'd be talking about building brand and profile, all roads would lead back to confidence. We'd talk about negotiating pay rises, going for roll-up, new opportunities. All roads would lead back to pay rises as well. So I think for us, even the conversation today really centres around confidence. Is there anything you want to add there, Fee?
Welcome. My background is strategic brand management and marketing for global multinationals, and became really curious about this whole world of how do we create the culture and environment where people can thrive. And as Kate said, that really lent into working a lot more with women in leadership, and women really considering what is the optimum way in which I can show up well in all aspects of my life and create the environment that's really going to mean I can contribute well in work, but also do the other things that are important to me.
Thanks, Faye. I think the other thing that is useful just to mention in terms of the orientation of the conversations we're having every day, whether that is with our individual coaching clients, women in our Acts of Confidence program, which is effectively our virtual product that we launched off the back of the book, and really a group coaching program that was really designed to take the conversations we're having and the thinking that we had developed in the book around what is confidence, how do you stay connected to your core confidence, and really move it into a conversation around behaviour and mindset shifts and perspectives. You'll see on screen that program is around 7 Acts of Confidence, but the main one that we will talk about today is really asking for what you want. I think the key piece, and this is really where we're going to start today's conversation with you, is clarity. Every day, almost every hour, it feels like sometimes we're having conversations around clarity, because all roads again lead back to clarity. When you're clear about what flex looks like for you, what's the context of that with perhaps your broader family requirements or personal requirements, when you're clear about why maybe you feel a little bit of discomfort about asking for that, and then actually following through and staying true to what's been agreed and enforcing boundaries, which is another one, Act of Confidence number 6, set and enforce boundaries. When you're clear about that, it's a whole lot easier to show up and deliver on those as well. I think the other key piece that I do want to just anchor into as we have today's conversation is this core philosophy of our work, which is the act of confidence comes before the feeling of confidence. Many of us are waiting to feel that 150% confident to apply for a role, to negotiate a pay rise, even to ask for a perhaps unusual type of flex requirements. We're waiting for it to feel good. We're waiting for it to feel like I've earned it potentially. And what we know is it's the action that will provide the feedback and create that feedback loop that will lead to that feeling of confidence.
Yeah, I think the thing we've learned here is as we've extended this work and as we've worked with more women, is there is a whole suite, that's that 7 Acts of Confidence that women either weren't doing, or if they did it, would significantly enhance their career aspirations and achieve some of the things that they were hoping to. And it was also an observation by a lot of the leaders that we were working with, that they were things that if women were doing more of it, would actually shift some of the dynamics that they were finding frustrating or difficult in the workplace. So as Kate said, there are a couple of pieces here that are very relevant to the conversation we're going to have today. And in particular, we're going to talk about that piece about clarity. We're also going to talk about some of the things that might get in the way, and then some good resources and tips on what to do.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. And so just on that, if you've got questions as we're going, pop them in the chat feed. If we can answer them as we're going, we will. Otherwise, we will certainly, the team will make sure we circle back to them at the end. So today's plan, we want to start the conversation around what does flex look like for you, and why is it important? And the reason that we start here is, I remember, way back when, pre-COVID, we would talk, people would talk about work-life balance. They would talk about, as the evolution of work-life balance has come, they would talk about flexibility, hybrid working, and people would always talk about the desire to have, I want better work-life balance. We still hear it, I think, in with clients. And my first question always back is, well, what do you mean by that? What does that look like? Because we hold for something, but if we're unclear about what the ideal outcome looks like, if we don't have that picture, it's very hard to achieve that outcome. And I think the important piece here, and organisations, COVID fast-tracked that in terms of what was acceptable and what organisations were willing to lean into. But this piece around being able to be really clear what it looks like for you may be very different to what it looks like for someone else. And the clearer you are about what it is, the easier it is to be able to achieve that outcome. The clearer you are about why it's important, then in those moments when it can feel uncomfortable and tricky, and we're going to talk about roadblocks today as well, because if we don't resource you to navigate through the roadblocks, and they absolutely come up, so many examples of clients who, feel uncomfortable even when they're it's been agreed with the organisation, still feel that there's ramifications or consequences for the level of flexibility or what that has been agreed with and the potential impact that it has on their career or their brand across the organisation. So we'll definitely talk about the roadblocks, but the clearer you are about the why in the moment when it feels uncomfortable, to stay true to those agreements. If you're clear about the why, it's easy to follow through.
I think the opportunity in this session is for you to start thinking about, what would it look like? What is that picture? To start to, get a little bit more specific about what it is you'd like to create in terms of a work environment that supports all aspects of your life. And as we're talking about here, the more specific, the more clear you are about what that is and why it matters to you, the easier it is as you go through some of the inevitable challenges. I mean, we know workplaces can be tricky. There are a lot of dynamics that are playing out. There are a lot of unwritten rules. There can be certain demands and pressures. And understanding that, but also understanding what's important to you, means you're more likely to find a path through and to be able to have good quality conversations in order to inform others and to keep on track with what matters to you.
I think if we just talk broadly around why it matters, I think there's levels of the why. I think there's the why to us individually. So we often talk about the what's in it for me. Then there's obviously our personal context, so family, and then of course our organisation as well. And we know that a big part of the business case for Flex has been linked to wellbeing. You'll see on screen there a stat around burnout. We were in the States last week presenting a piece around our work at a conference, a Women in Leadership conference. And there was a number of different keynote speakers talking about burnout and overwhelm. And it's interesting because this, and it's not uncommon in November. November is always the month where clients are talking to us about resigning. And we always kind of say, just take a beat, get to Christmas, take the break, and then come back and dig into some perspectives then and see how you're going. So it's always a tough month, I think, in the year, probably one of the hardest. And this collision back post-COVID, the ramp up of expectations of organisations, combined with a lot of what's going on economically and politically in the world, means that there is a lot of things that people are having to navigate, and people are feeling really, really, I guess, overloaded and overwhelmed, and in using language like burnout.
As you can see, there is some stats that are certainly coming out that say that there is a rise of people feeling as though they're burnt out, people feeling as though in the past year particularly, I think navigating the return to work coming out of COVID, what does that look like? How do I recalibrate my life? I had to calibrate it, one way when we were in various forms of lockdown and things like that, although less so if you were in Perth. And then thinking about, well, what will I need to do now that I've got to fit all the other things back into my life, and all of the travel and family demands and all of the things on my plate. So certainly there's been some stresses around that. And as Kate said, we're hearing from quite a lot of our clients that it's challenging. It's challenging to fit in everything that I want to fit in.
Yeah, I think the organisational context that we're seeing, and this has probably been in the last 6 months, and it's varied, but certainly here in Australia, there is quite a strong push and in some cases mandated return to office. Certainly, there's only a handful that I know are 5 days. So there is this piece around the being sort of, that mix, so the hybrid working. But certainly we've noticed in this back 6 months of the year, lots of organisations starting to mandate 3 days in office. And that's certainly putting some pressure on people in terms of now starting to recalibrate expectations of organisations, and really what our desire is. What is it that I want in terms of the ideal flex scenario?
Yeah, I think, just letting you know, Kate, there is a bit of feedback on your audio at the moment. I'm not sure if other people are getting that, but Siada is mentioning that. Okay, shall we keep going?
Thanks, Fee. So I think let's take a second and a beat to think about what would ideal flex look like. And when we always talk about what's your ideal best case scenario, because in the conversation of negotiations, sometimes there is going to need to be some give and take. But really looking at what does that look like? What's the picture? And I think here, Fee, it's really useful to dig into some specifics for you, craft the picture of what that looks like, because once we're really clear about ideal flex, and I think many of you will have good connection with this, albeit maybe you haven't thought about it in detail. But if you've got paper, it'd be good for you just to put some thoughts down. We'd love for you to share it in the chat feed as well. But what would ideal flex look like? Just head over to the chat feed. Just give us some context. It may be finishing at a certain time. It may be location in terms of where you're working. So that mix of office and working from home. I know there's some interesting moves around working internationally, and some of our progressive organisations have come out and said, you can work from another country 4 weeks a year if you want to combine travel and also working as well. So there's some really interesting pieces coming out around flex. Equally, conversations around specifics in terms of hours that we're working, what that looks like across a working week.
Yeah, I think the opportunity here is for you to start to think about what this looks like. And as Kate said, we'd love to hear from some of you, some of the things you're thinking about, some of the things that you think would create the ideal scenario for you. Is it around hours? Is it around location? Is it around some of the conditions, some of the things you want to do as well, or as part of your work? Is it about some continuing education? Is it around some of your other responsibilities? And just starting to think about what, at least, in an ideal world, what would it be that would mean I could show up as my best self and contribute really well at work, and I'd also be able to do the other things that are important to me and to be able to do those well without feeling the constant push-pull or the challenge or the sense that I'm always rushing or I'm always behind or that sort of thing. And we know a lot of women report this and feel that. And it's, it's a bit tricky. I think, already thanks Megan and Siada, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name well, but for sharing, because this is really helpful for us. And Megan, you said be able to finish around the regular 4 to 5 p.m, allowing you to be home the same time as my partner to have family time, and just knowing that, right? And it's not that this needs to be, there doesn't be any excuse here or anything like that. It's just, if we were there together at that time, that would be fantastic for us. That would work well for us at this stage of our family. What I will say as someone who has older children is I found it changed all the time. As my children were very young, we needed different time and different support things. As they went into primary school, it was different again. Then they were in high school, it was different again. And being able to shift and adapt to that and to start to build some structures around it was important. So yeah, you've talked about breaking down work hours into chunks to cater for personal life. And I think this is a really interesting one. Some of our team is not in Australia, so we work on different time zones. Like Jenna is in Canada, one of our teams in Canada. So we've been really thinking about how can we as a team structure that well and do it well. Yeah, and Steffi, you're saying something similar. What would I be able to do? And I think starting to think about some of the other elements of your life that we need to design and bring into the conversation is that, you know, care for children or care for parents, and what do those structures require of me? If there's pick up and drop off times, what does that look like? How do I design this to work?
Yeah, I think back to, you know, when I was in corporate, I'm not a particularly good morning person at that point anyway. It's changed as I've gotten older. And I wanted to do exercise in the morning. I knew that I saw the pattern that, you know, I would get to 5:30 in the afternoon, and even if I wanted to go to the gym, there was always a pressure point on it, right? There was always work to be done. And so I found it hard to maintain that commitment. And so I knew that if I exercised in the morning, that generally that was a better strategy for me in terms of getting it in, and I would say yes to it more often. And so I went to my CFO at the time and I said, listen, I want to exercise in the morning. I don't want to be, you know, having to get ready at work, come and have showers at work and do all that sort of stuff. I don't want to be rushing through getting up, crack a door and having to rush through peak hour to get in here. So, you know, 2 mornings a week I'm going to start at 9:30. And that way I could get up, I could get that exercise in the morning, come home, get ready the way I normally would, and then come into the office and start my working way. And I think the other thing, and I remember a staff member we're working with as well, is it's also just about really thinking about what's going to make the best difference, and then being prepared to. I think we've got it getting creative as well. We're seeing mixtures in terms of you know, it not necessarily being the same rhythm every week. So looking at fortnight windows, periods of time. And I think someone was earlier on was saying, you know, 1 week it's a few days so 4 days in the office for Lauren, 1 day work from home, or 3 days, 2 days work from home. And so looking at mixing it up. Of course, always when we're thinking about flex and working hours and working locations, we obviously want to be thinking about us individually, but then also thinking about what's good for the organisation and what's good for my team.
Yeah, thank you. So many of you sharing some great things you're already trying and experimenting with, and thinking about what this will look like. And Megan, this piece about you know, working from home, I've got more exercise. So just as Kate was talking about, if that's really important, because we know these self-care pieces, they're often the things that drop off as we get more pressured, as we feel as though there's lots of challenges, as I'm trying to wear so many hats. Exercise is often one of the first ones to go, and that can be actually really undermining for our overall health and well-being. So being able to find ways to fit that in, or even, as part of your travel or commute, including that. You said you've actually got a stand-up desk and a walking pad. I'm about to invest in one of those walking pads. It's one of my 2024 pieces to do that. Yeah, and I think there is going to be a lot more debate and discussion. I think if you are going to be changing regularly around the days you're in and the days you're out, really good communication systems with each other, with your teams, so that you can do that well. Lauren, you've talked about flexibility for a better work-life balance. What would be really helpful is to get really clear about what that looks like for you. So what is your optimum, days in the office, days at home, commute times, start, finish times? What does it look like so that you can have the life balance that's so important? Sneha, this piece about a 4-day work week, we've been experimenting with that, and a lot of organisations have, and there's definitely some advantages to that. So again, that might be something that a team or you can experiment with over a 6-month period and see, track how things are going and productivity and those sort of things. Often it's experimenting here.
Yeah, and I think many of you have already started to move to that second part of the why, to get explicitly clear about why this matters. Because, for example, my example I was sharing earlier, I wanted that flex. I wanted to start at 9:30 twice a week because I wanted to exercise. But note that second part, right? The second part was I wanted to exercise in the morning because if I didn't do it in the morning, it was increasingly hard for me to be able to do it in the afternoon, because work pressures would always make it really difficult for me to say yes to exercise, right? I knew myself well enough to know that when I was sitting there and there was something that needed to get done, often urgently, that I would generally lean into. I'd just get it done and I'd sacrifice the exercise, because at that moment, what was most important was the work deadline. And so being able to recognize that means in the moment, when I'm, if someone's pushing me to come, can you come in early? Back then, to come in early to attend this meeting or do this, I was just really firm on my boundaries, because by saying yes to, coming in early, I was saying no to exercise. And so this piece about being really clear on the why this matters makes it a whole lot easier to make really good decisions. And when we talk about enforcing the boundary, so it'd be good to hear about the why. Some of you have talked about the exercise. What we really want to do here is strengthen the why, really get you super clear about why it's important, so that in those moments when your boundaries are being tested, you're able to you're able to say no to other things that potentially are requiring your time.
I'm loving some of the sharing and tips and things that are happening in the chat feed. It's fantastic. And Lauren, just this piece of recognition, same as Kate, you're a morning person for exercise. That's when it works best for you. And so how do I build structures around that, or how do I make sure that I've got enough time to do that and attend to that part of my life that's important, as well as the work that's coming up? Yeah, and Avril, I'm a bit like you. I'm more of an afternoon, particularly with daylight saving. That sort of end of the day, I like to do things then. So yeah, we're all different, and working out what suits you and your cadence and your rhythm is part of this getting really clear, and then being able to hone in on that why.
Beautiful. So make sure you've got that written down. What's the ideal flex? What does that look like, and why it matters? Because then we're going to talk about what can get in the way, what are the roadblocks. And this is an important conversation, because what we don't often do is ahead of time think about, okay, I've made this agreement around what flex looks like, but there will inherently be times when your boundaries will be tested, right? When those agreements, where someone will want you to be flexible with some of these agreements, and things will come up, right, that will in the moment make it really difficult or uncomfortable, or there'll be potentially some concerns around impact it could have on personal brand or access to opportunities, all of those sorts of things. So being able to spotlight that ahead of time, and if I share my own example, being able to be super proactive, right, with my my CFO early in the week, to recognise what was in his schedule, what deliveries he had on, what he needed help with, so that there wouldn't be the requests to kind of bend and come in early if needed. So being able to get ahead of the curve, so that I could I could really avoid how many tests, because I knew that I was still pretty leveraged, right? That I wanted to do a good job. I was positioning for progression. I wanted to be seen as someone he could rely on. And this other thing was really important to me as well. So our ability to forecast where things could get challenged, where we could get into tricky pieces, and then being able to lean into good conversations. Equally, if we think about actually negotiating that flex, recognizing some of the pushback. You're on mute, Fee.
Geez. I think there's a whole lot of things that can get in the way here. And what we like to do in our work is to at least have thought about some of these in advance, because we're going to be more prepared and we're going to be able to engage with those in a way that means we're more likely to navigate through what will inevitably come up. I think, you know, some of these things are to do with team dynamics, they're to do with pressures on the business, they're to do with different styles of working. The more intel, the more knowledge we have about what's going on for others, as your example demonstrates, Kate, the easier it is for us to find a way and to preserve the time that we've said is so important to us. So starting to think ahead and to be really conscious of some of the things that can derail us and can mean that we are likely to succumb to the pressure of the moment, which means we might end up sacrificing something that's important to us, that family time in the evening, or that exercise time we've allocated, or, you know, an activity that's really important to us, a hobby, or something else that we know really fills us up. And that's why most people care about this, and why the topic is such a live one and important, because it's not that we don't want to do a good job, it's that something or some other things are equally important to us, and we want to be able to find a good place and time around all of them.
Yeah, I think a piece that I'd hear is this can come up, the roadblock can come up ahead of the negotiating, actually going in and asking, but equally they're likely to resurface in the execution, right, of any agreements that we have. And I think that's really important once we do negotiate and get agreement from our organisation around whatever ideal flex or whatever agreed flex looks like. It's then holding really tight boundaries around it, because if we agree something and then we're very fluid, right? Sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. Unconsciously, the message in the organisation is not important. It's not really a boundary. You know, you are super flexible, and so we create a rod for our own back. And then at some point we'll get irritated and annoyed, and you know, we'll be like, "Well, but I agreed with." And then an opposite response then also is yes, and we've been super flexible. So key stakeholders in our organisation are used to that level of expectation. So that the original agreement has now blended to an alternate agreement, because that's how we're behaving, right? The unconscious expectation is now here. It's not kind of here as originally agreed. So being really conscious of some of the stuff that can come up and get in the way. Lack of clarity is one, but we've talked you through already the importance of being specifically clear on the what and the why. I think the other thing I'd say, we've got a client, we do a lot of women in leadership programs for organisations, and we had a guest speaker. We often do some good cross-fertilisation of bringing external speakers in to those organisations for the female leaders, just to hear different from different senior female leaders, their stories, etc. And she just talked about, you know, being unapologetic and leaving, you know, wrapping no meetings after 4:30, so that she should be out of the office at 5. So, you know, she'll be home with her children in the afternoon. And I think what's really interesting around that is because she's that is always a really firm boundary for her. Others are clear about that. They understand when she's available, when she's not available, and they just accept it, right? They work around it. There's certainty for everyone. It's the blurring of lines, the confusion that then provides uncertainty that inherently then often can continue the pressure on us and continue the pressure on the boundaries.
Yeah, I think, again, thanks for all your feedback in the chat feed, really helpful. Megan, this piece about feeling guilty, that often comes up. We often hear roadblocks around that. And this is, again, around what's the norm, what's the accepted here, what's the what's the expectations of the people around us. And so when we do have conversations here, it's important, if we notice those things coming up, it's important, you know, to think about, how am I going to address that? How am I going to deal with this as it comes up? Because, you know, a lot of organizations are saying self-care is incredibly important. And then when we start to defend or to ensure we are taking care of ourselves, we can get some pushback. So if we know that's likely to happen, what are some of the things we might do? I think one of our, you know, acts of confidence is asking for what you want. So this piece about the clearer you are, and a little bit of preparation and thinking about having a good conversation about really being prepared to state what it is you want and why that's so important. And then having that as a reference point if things do become a bit sticky or challenging as you go through.
I just made a comment. Steffi's talked about, you know, the balance of the win-win. That's really important, right? As is, and Lauren, you phrased this, what are the concerns? You know, absolutely, unfortunately, there are some people in organisations who have abused work from home. There's a stat, I think, comes out of Singapore that I can't remember who shared it with us now, Fee, but the Netflix, right? The Netflix view rate on Fridays is like through the roof as compared to other days, which is really interesting, right? You know, the source of that data I don't think has been confirmed. But this piece around being able to, you know, yes, other people will have abused it. I think some organisations still, you know, struggle a little bit. Like, the beautiful thing about COVID that we would never have gotten, we would never have had this level of widespread agreed remote working without COVID, because exactly to your point, there is at a leadership level in many organisations, often a lot of older leaders or old school leaders around this. If I can't see you, I can't trust you to work from home. Of course, we know to focus then in on outcomes and being able to, you know, and that's one of the tips I give clients who are looking to negotiate significant work from home, is actually be really clear on what you're going to deliver. And make sure that you are delivering on what you said you were going to do. It's very difficult for leaders to push back on remote working or flex working when you are delivering value, because ultimately that's the exchange, right? We're hired and paid in exchange for time, but mostly in exchange for delivering outcomes. And when you can demonstrate that, it makes it a little bit harder, I think quite significantly harder, if you put the conversation around collaboration and relationships and connections aside just for now, to be able to push back on some of this stuff. I think the other thing that we want to, you know, really also talk about is fear. So fear of being judged. What will other people think of me? What impact will this have on my reputation across the organisation? What could this mean in terms of opportunities, access to projects?
Yeah, I think this is a big one, and I think this clues into something, I think as Megan, you said before about guilt, and then Lauren, this conversation about not being trusted. All of these kind of difficult dynamics or things that make it more challenging to ask for what we want, to achieve the flex that's going to work for us. You know, the worry that I'm going to be seen as, you know, less committed, or not as much of a team player, or that maybe I'm not doing as much work as other people. All of these things can come up, and we're, you know, humans are, you know, the way we make sense of the world is to very quickly make decisions and judge stuff. That's kind of how our brains work. So it's normal that we would be worried about this. It's really normal that we're fearful and scared about people judging us for our choices and for our decisions. And so for many of us, we have to work through unpacking what's actually going on, and whether the fear or the worry that we have is really, it's really appropriate or proportionate to what we're asking for. Often our fears are exaggerated. They can be even from another experience that went badly, or another time where we asked a manager or we tried to do something and things didn't work out. We can often bring that fear or worry to the table when we're thinking about whether or not we'll ask for the flex that we really need or we want. And I think there's a lovely piece here about, being really conscious that what you think in your brain, what you think other people are judging you, that's not necessarily the actual story. That can be very much something that you've created or an idea you have. So starting to question your fears, starting to question the guilt that you talked about, questioning, because this hasn't worked for other people, does that have to mean it has to be the same for me? What could I do to demonstrate? Lauren, I love your piece about, how productive you are working from home. And so, there's maybe a conversation to have, 2 days a week. I know that if I'm working from home, this is the kind of level of delivery I can do. This is what I can contribute. I'm not saying you do want 2 days a week, but whatever your scenario is, being, again, really conscious of engaging in the more difficult conversation. If you've noticed a trend or you've noticed something in your organisation where some people are leaving, maybe those conversations aren't being had. Maybe they're not. Maybe it needs to be a more individual approach rather than this, everybody needs to do the same thing.
Yeah, the value here is to be consciously aware of this, right? Because they are operating beneath the surface. Our ability to be able to bring them to the surface, to be able to see them, to recognize when we are reacting, where we are worried, or fearful of being judged, or when all of that is present. When you're aware of that, then you have an opportunity to do something with that, right? To be able to go and test some of the assumptions, to potentially implement a strategy to be more proactive in terms of building relationships. One of the, obviously the big calling card in terms of return to office is very much around connection and collaboration and relationships. There is value in being in person. Right? There's no question. We've seen that in conferences. We've seen that in office in our experience. And there are strategies that you can do to get those same benefits and outcomes through remote working. But we have to be really proactive in being able to do that. I often talk in context of, the water cooler or the lift opportunities, right? Those unexpected, impromptu moments that give you proximity to senior stakeholders for whom it's useful for you to build relationships, for them to have visibility over your skill, capability, experience, etc., and leveraging those opportunities when they present themselves. You can still create, you can orchestrate that same sort of catch-up conversation. It's more planned, right? So it's not going to be that you're happen to be, passing each other in a virtual room, for example. That's less harder to create, but you can be really proactive in reaching out and building connection and conversation and creating space for you to build relationships. We just have to be more proactive in doing that. So thinking about that, identifying some strategies around how to navigate through those roadblocks is really important. I want to get on. I'm really conscious of time. We want to make sure we come to your questions as well. Thinking about the how-to in terms of negotiating. The first thing is get clear, know your why, right? What are you negotiating for? Be really clear about that it's important. We've talked you through it. You've already come up with some ideas there. Because when you're in conversation, you want to be really specific and you want to make sure there's no confusion, right? Because when there's confusion, it's like it gets weird, it gets icky. Our ability to be really clear, this is what I need, allows us to have that conversation around what the organisation needs.
Yeah, I think there's lots of pieces here about, Naila, I think you asked earlier about, you want to, I think it's going to be a side hustle, some copywriting you want to do. If it's that you want to segue from the kind of work you're doing now into a new area, or you're maybe establishing a side hustle, again, the clarity of what you're doing and why and what you're going to need to do it. If you've got that organised, then it's the next piece here, which is, this is really important. We've got to do some preparation. It can be it can be quite frustrating for organisations and for managers when all of a sudden we find out that someone's frustrated or disappointed or angry or feeling guilty, and we haven't had a good conversation about it. So this piece here is all about doing a little bit of preparation, knowing what it is that the organisation needs, particularly if you're challenging, Lauren, your point of view about the value of when you work from home. What's the business case here? How do I describe this well? How do I make sure that we are, to an earlier point, in a win-win conversation here? If when I get the flexibility to do this, it means I'm also able to do that. Or when I'm when I work from home these 2 days a week, that means the 2 days that I'm in, I'm able to do more of X, Y, and Z. Really starting to very clearly demonstrate the value that the flex will bring for you as an individual, and also for your organisation or team.
Yeah, with that same CFO, I negotiated 1 day work from home. This was 15 years ago, right? So it was unusual, and the context was two things, right? The first was productivity, because I had a team of 10 who all sat around me, and I was a key stakeholder for many execs in the business. So they needed stuff from me. My people needed stuff from me regularly. Someone was always wanting a piece of me, right? I was in the office. Someone always wanted something. There was always conversation. So I wasn't getting my work done, like the actual work, the review work I needed to do, or the execution work that was needed. I wasn't able to get to that because I barely had, very rarely had time where I could sit down for 30 minutes or half an hour 30 minutes or an hour uninterrupted to be able to execute. So a big part of that conversation and business case was, I need to be able to, I'm struggling to be able to get all of this work done that you need from me. You want me working on some of this project stuff that I know is important. I'm struggling to do that because people always want a piece of me, right? I don't have the time, that dedicated, uninterrupted time where I can really get into flow and get some of this, budget building, reporting, all of those sorts of things done. That was part A. Part B was, by Wednesday afternoon, I'm shattered, because emotionally, like, everyone's just, I'm up, I'm in here, everyone always wants me, like I'm emotionally exhausted, which means, by Thursday and Friday, I can feel I'm not as productive as I could be. So to be able to have the Wednesday midweek, to be able to get that stuff done, to be able to not have to get up and put makeup on, and I said this to him, right? Not get dressed, to be able to be at home, and just means I come back in quite refreshed on Thursday morning, and I feel and I can see that I can deliver a whole lot more. And so being really clear on why it's important, right? But equally, why it's good for me, why it's good for the organisation. Thinking about it from their perspective, equally thinking about some of the things that might come up that would be concerning for them as well. Fee, anything else you want to mention there?
No, I think we might get to number 3, because and if you do have any questions here, please pop them in the chat feed. We'd love to answer those, and any comments you have around your business case or questions you have there. I think the third element that we've noticed is really important is being willing to ask. And this can mean leaning into some of that discomfort we talked about, or potential judgment, or that feeling of guilt, because we're going to ask for what we want, and we want to do that from a place of personal power. We want to do that from a place where you feel resourced to actually engage in the conversation, because this is going to be a negotiation. Some organisations are going to be fairly open and easy, and they may quite readily agree to it. The person who said earlier, I really want to be able to leave the office by 4. It might be, I really want to leave the office by 4 2 days a week or 3 days a week. If that's your, that might be the agreement that you're happy with, and ultimately you might like to be able to do it more days. But to really start to resource yourself, and this is very much the work we do, both in the book but also in our program, is helping you get in touch with that authentic personal power. Because what we've observed is that when you ask from that very genuine, very aligned and very purposeful place, we're far more likely to get the response that we want. And we're far more likely to engage the other people in a really worthwhile conversation.
I think the other piece I would add here is from a place of personal power. It's not asking like you're doing me a favor, which is from a weaker place. We talk a lot about exchange. And so that piece back of being able to really know your value, knowing what you contribute, that's why it's really useful to be able to, demonstrate the benefits to the organisation as well as for you personally, because really being able to articulate and own your value means that when you're making these agreements, from a power perspective, we feel in exchange, in good exchange, which is it's a win-win outcome. When it's a win-lose outcome, someone feels like they're losing, inevitably there will be dynamics that will present itself, that will be used in some cases to muddy the waters, potentially to unwind agreements, all of those sorts of things. So being able to be really solid when you're in these conversations is super important.
I think that what we know is that sometimes these can feel like quite a difficult negotiation. We can get that sense of feeling guilty about things, and so what we really encourage you in the conversation, once you've done that, you've got the clarity, you're prepared, and you're in the conversation, is to really listen. To really listen to what's going on for the other person. Hopefully they're really listening to you. But when you listen without judgment or defensiveness, this can be a bit hard because naturally when people push back on us, we tend to get a bit defensive. But if we can actually listen and we can take on board what their concerns, what their criticism was, what their worries are, if we can listen to that, and you may not have an answer absolutely then. You might hear something and go, oh my God, I hadn't really thought about it like that. Even to go, oh, hey, that is a good point. Let me think about that and I'll come back with some ideas and solutions for that in the next, 24 or 48 hours. Or it might be, you may have thought about it. You might go, yes, that's a really good point. How would we collectively, or how would we as a team, or what would we need to do in order to solve that problem? And I think this is about we're co-creating a solution here, a solution that works for me as the individual and what I need to do in my world, and something that works for the organisation. And so rather than it feeling like a fight dynamic where someone's got to have power over, this is more about how do we solve this issue together so we both get what we need.
Yeah, and the piece I just add is when you demonstrate you're looking for that win-win solution, people are far more flexible, right? Far more likely to lean in. I think the final piece is have a backup plan or a plan B. So we have our ideal, but equally have where are you willing to negotiate to? And for you shared a great example. Like if it was 4 o'clock every day, and starting with what we call a small experiment, starting at 2 days a week or 3 days a week or whatever that's going to look like. Once if we can't agree, if that's not a win, if we can't get to a win-win, then what is a win? What would a win look like to you? What would be an ideal outcome look like to you? And be in that really good dialogue and exchange. I think what we really want to make sure you do off the back of this session is these are always interesting. We want them to be really useful. And so thinking about what your best next step is, it might be getting clearer about what good flex looks like specifically and why. Maybe it's digging into some of the roadblocks. We'd encourage you to perhaps think about doing some journaling to support you there. That allows you to, create space and time to be able to think about what might be going on. Or potentially it's actually just to do some of that prep work to lean in and to start having those conversations.
If there's any last questions, please pop them in the chat feed. Love to answer those before we close out. I know we've got a few last minutes there. I think, the whole essence of this is it's conversation. It's something that's dynamic, it's live, it's not, it doesn't get resolved in one iteration. That's why we talk about small experiments or small acts of confidence. What's the first thing you can ask for? What's the first way in which you can start to approach this conversation and to start to get some traction? Where we talk a lot about this feedback loop, that each time you ask for something, you might not get a yes straight away. You might get a not now or a no. And that's good intel because now you know a bit more and you know more for preparing your business case for next time or having a different conversation with someone else. There's a lot that even when we ask and we get a no, we still learn through the experience. So being willing to lean into conversations, even though they're a bit uncomfortable, always teaches us something.
Yeah, and no is intel, right? And no is information. Getting a no allows us at least a start position, and to be able to have that conversation. Okay, if not that, then this, or understanding. Okay, help me understand why it's a no. Let me get your perspective so that I can start to be able to think about how we could find again the win-win. Yeah. I think the other thing we just wanted to share in terms of next steps, committing to that small act of confidence. The QR code on screen will take you through to a link tree. If you are interested in finding out more about our work, you can download a free chapter of Core Confidence. And of course, if you do want to buy a copy of the book, we've got a discount code there, VIP. Is it just CCVIP fee, or what's the discount code?
CCVIP will give you the,
write that in the feed for the team. If you did want a copy of the book, it's 25 Australian dollars delivered. So a really good resource if you want to start to dig into some of the things that we've talked about today.
Okay, thank you. We will be sending a follow-up email with the code for the book and links as well. So yeah, if you didn't get it, then you'll get that in your email tomorrow or the next day, and you'll also have a recording of this video as well. And yeah, this is like a forum, so you can obviously ask questions once we've ended the stream, and meet with other like-minded women. Yeah, just kind of hang out for a little bit. Other than that, are we ready to log off or anything else to add? We good? Okay.
Just thank you for being here. Thank you for being super active in the chat. We always love that. Really appreciate your time. And if you please feel free to reach out if there's anything we've shared today resonated. If you've got any questions, more than happy to connect on LinkedIn. And also you've shared, thanks, Jenna, our details in the WORK180 platform.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you all for being here, and you'll hear from us soon. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thanks.